Hey YouTube, what are you doing? Get ready, we're here at last, the final mandatory pose. Hey guys, what's up? It's the Tominator back again. This time we're going to be taking a look at the crowd-pleasing most muscular pose. Who hits this pose the best throughout history? We're going to be figuring that one out. And right out the bat, a couple things to note. Number one, this pose is pretty much tailor-made for the modern-day mass monster. These are the guys who tend to look the best in it. No offense to the old school guys, but they really can't pull it off as well as these beastly monsters we see today. With a couple of exceptions like Arnold, for instance, but in general, this is more of a mass monster pose, just like the ab and thigh is more of an aesthetic guy's pose. The other thing to note is that because there's several different variations of this pose, and it's easy to hide weaknesses, a lot of guys look really good in this pose. So needless to say, I have a lot of pictures to go through. I've got almost 200 slides, which is a lot because even my longest videos thus far have only been around 150. And it's just because it's just an easy pose to hit and so many guys look really good in it. But anyway, let's not waste any more time. We're going to jump into this thing. Once again, no particular order, top pick at the end. Let's go. First up, we got William Bonac. This guy's just got that bubbly effect. Kind of reminds me a little bit like a smaller hybrid of Phil Heath and Kai Green, because from the back he resembles Kai a lot. But from the front with these arms and delts and even the legs, they look more kind of full like Phil's. Not as good as either of them, mind you, but still a pretty solid performer in this shot. We got Ben Pakulski. Quite the grimace he's got there, but look at the delts. They look insane in this pose. And he's got arguably the best wheels in the game today. So yes, this is his best pose by far. Even looks pretty good in the crab despite his crappy arms. He's got pretty shitty arms and a very poor back, but the back's a non-factor in this pose. So this is why he looks pretty good in this most muscular pose. Here we got him next to Dexter Jackson and Lionel Bayecki there. Lionel Bayecki, look at these legs, man. Wow. They look almost fake. They look like plastic action figures or something. And I mean that in a good way. They look amazing. He looks a lot like Flex Wheeler in terms of the shape, the aesthetics, and the definition here. And pretty good in the crab as well. So as long as this guy comes dialed in, he's one of my favorite pros on the scene today. Dexter Jackson, probably the best separation between the delt and the arm that you'll ever see. You can notice it right here. His delts look really good and striated here in this hands clasp version. And very full. Like, look at the arms, the delts, the pecs, the traps. The traps, oh boy, yeah. And you can best believe he's popping them out at you. Like, he's making them look even bigger than they really are by kind of lifting them up. That's a thing you can do. I'm not sure if every guy can do it, but Dexter definitely can. You can notice the progress he made over the years when he was a skinny little twerp back then. And yes, he's secretly a Ninja Turtle. We all knew it. I couldn't resist throwing this in there. I just came across this online and it's hilarious, right? He definitely looks like a Ninja Turtle. We got Flex Wheeler. This is the guy that Dexter most idolized when he was growing up, coming onto the scene of bodybuilding. I remember him hearing him mention that in one of his training videos at one point. And Flex has one of the best crab and hands-on-hip most musculars ever. Even though he's relatively narrow and arm-dominant, to me, an arm-dominant guy really fares well in this pose, because it really is kind of a standout pose for the arms. Here he is when he's a little bit younger, looking very aesthetic, not quite as beastly, but still really good. And yeah, I really love his crab version, though. Pretty good with the one hand on hip, too. This right here, when he's a little bigger, looks almost like Phil Heath. But this crab is just crazy. And look at him on the right there, like the bubbly effect. Dang, son. And Shawn in the middle looks pretty good as well. Let's take a look at him. For a shorter guy, he's really good in this pose, because he's not the biggest, that's for sure. But he can just hit it in so many different ways, like this one, the uncommon hands behind the back. Here he is next to Dorian, and I actually like Shawn better overall, even though Dorian's got extra width, and I like Dorian's traps more in this pose. That's more just because Shawn's kind of got his shoulders lifted up a bit, and his traps are all scrunched. But if we're talking about the rest of the body, like the delts, the pecs, the arms, even the forearms, everything looks better than Yates here. Even his forearms, even though Dorian's known for having really good forearms, his brachio radialis is kind of meh, and so Shawn's look better here. Here he is again. Pretty good hands clasp version. Even the crab he can hit pretty good most of the time. I like him best, though, in this kind of version with the hands on hips. And look at this, very aesthetic. Can't really picture too many other guys doing this. Maybe some of the more aesthetic guys from the 80s and stuff, like, I don't know, Bob Paris, or I can see probably Lee Labrada doing this thing. Vince Taylor, maybe. We got Mike Ashley, though. Guy from the late 80s, early 90s looks pretty good. Look at all the detail through his chest there, the split. We got Phil Hill. Really good leg development for his era, because I believe he was also in the early 90s. Yeah, pretty massive legs. He's doing the Jay Cutler like heel stomp thing here. We got Joel Stubbs, absolute beast. Look at the monstrous width through the delts and the thickness of the pecs. The lats jutting out there at like a 90-degree angle. He's got one of the best backs ever. He's really known for that. Unfortunately, his arms are kind of subpar and his legs are garbage. But if we're just taking a look here at the delts, the traps, and the pecs, this can hang with literally anybody in the history of the sport right here. The traps are huge, monstrous mountains. The pecs, look at the split there. The delts are really round. This was like Coleman-esque right here. It's just a shame about the arms and the legs not matching up. Big Ramy, one of the best hands-on hip most musculars I think you'll ever see. My only complaint here is that his calves really suffer in comparison to those gargantuan quads, and it looks imbalanced and unproportioned. But the X-frame is ridiculous. Like, look at the width through the delts and the quad sweep. That's his best version of this pose, I think, is the hands-on hip. Still looks pretty good here. And with the one hand on hip, he's absolutely murking this gremlin version of Branch Warren. Branch has been chopped up and spit out here. He looks like crap later in his career. So Big Ramy's destroying him. He also looks pretty good in the crab pose. Well, not the best actually overall, but in this particular picture he looks good, so I threw it in. We got another giant, though, Marcus Rule. Some of the peakiest, freakiest biceps ever, man, and the delts and the pecs, too. Before he had his pec injury, his pecs were amazing. And, yeah, this guy is, even the legs, too. He was just a blocky mass monster, the freak of freaks, really. He was the freakiest bodybuilder in the history of the sport, I think. Here he is, one of the only guys who can match up to Ronnie in the mass factor. You can see he actually looks bigger than Big Ron here. This would have been probably 2004, I think. So even though Ronnie had better legs and was definitely more fully developed with a way better back, I mean, the back doesn't factor into this pose at all, so that doesn't matter. And I like Marcus more overall because his delts, his traps look better. He looks wider and bigger. And yeah, in this, like Ronnie in this pose, don't get me wrong, I like him way better than Marcus. But in this particular picture, I would go for Marcus. Here he is with this magical fairy lighting of this 2002 Night of Champions show, looking like a freak. And we got him next to another German giant, Dennis Wolf, there in the center. This is one of Dennis's strongest poses as well. Because just like Marcus, he has crazy delts, really good width. What's with these Germans with crazy delts, man? Because Ronnie Rockel, I believe, is also German, and he was known for really good delts, too. I'm sure there's others. But here's Dennis just destroying this smaller lineup. And yeah, really good quad sweep on the guy. I just wish he kind of would have tensed his chest a little bit more, because it tends to look kind of soft. He could definitely use some striations and stuff there. But yeah, he's whooping Jay here. This would have been 2007 Mr. Olympia when Jay came in really soft. You can see that through his chest and his delts and his arms. Dennis looks way better. But when Jay's on, he's on. And, you know, he has some of the best delts in the history of the sport. You can notice that here, and the traps too. Let's not even talk about the quads. No need to mention those. But 2009, this would have been his best shape ever, in my opinion. This would be the prejudging. And this, I think, is from the night show. Lighting looks a little bit better here. He looks more stuff happening here. And even when he was younger, he looks really good in this pose too. He's just a very solid, well-rounded mass monster. Probably the best overall in terms of like completeness for any of the mass monsters. Doesn't really have too many weaknesses. Just, I guess, his lack of maybe vascularity and conditioning throughout most of his career would be his only real weakness. Lack of back detail, I guess, too. But anyway, Kai Green, another really good mass monster. I really like him in his hands-on hip variations of this pose. I feel like those are his strongest ones. That's what he should pretty much go to most of the time. But then again, you know, I was able to come across this hands clasped version with Kai, and he looks really good here, too. I haven't seen any other pictures of him besides this one in this pose, but he looks good here. And even in the crab. Now, 9 times out of 10 in the crab, Kai looks kind of shitty. His arms look really unusually small. And he really suffers in comparison to, say, Phil Heath, who he's often standing next to in this pose. But here he looks amazing. I don't know if it's really good lighting, the angles, or whatnot, man. Maybe he just came in really on, but he looks good here. And Victor Martinez also looks really good in the crab. These guys used to train together. I remember watching a video of them in 2007 when Victor was like the real up-and-comer, like second in the world, and Kai Green was a relative no-name. They were training at Bev Francis Powerhouse Gym in New York. I'm not sure if these guys keep in touch, if they're actually friends or whatever, if they still both train there, but just a little sorry for you guys. And we got him in the crab most muscular in 2007. This is his best version, I think, of the pose and also of his physique in terms of the year in the show. Because his arms, he reminds me a little bit of Dennis here in this pose, the way he's just filling it out, but his arms are even better. He's not quite as wide as Wolf, though. But yeah, really good muscle bellies on Victor. Chris Cormier, a very well-rounded guy. I really like him in the hands-on hip most muscular. That's his strongest one. So he doesn't look quite as good in this one. Still pretty solid, though. Yeah, I like him better here. Good, a little bit of feathering there in the legs, too. It's nice. We got him in the hands class next to Big Ron, and yeah, Big Ron's beating him, let's be honest. I mean, Cormier looks pretty solid, too, but Ronnie was just so dominant most years in this pose, and he could hit it in a variety of ways, which is really good. You could easily give Ronnie the win in this pose if you were so inclined. You could definitely make a case for him. But the reason I'm not giving it to him is, to be frank, I've already given him like actually three poses if you count the side chest, because I tied him with Levrone on that one. And he doesn't need any more. I've already given him three poses. I'm not going to give him half of the mandatories. So that's number one. But also, I feel like Ronnie is a little bit inconsistent sometimes in this pose, depending on his conditioning and stuff. He doesn't always look the best, whereas I feel there's some other guys that are just more consistent throughout their careers than Ronnie. But man, look at the veins here. That's what really jumps out at me in this one, is look at the veins all through the legs, and that's like giant-ass snakes running through his biceps. It looks absolutely insane. Here he is in the 1997 Finland Grand Prix. Slow motion. This is right before he began his unstoppable reign as Mr. Olympia. You can see the potential, obviously. And here he is next to another giant Dennis James. And if only James could have looked this good on stage as he does in the gym or in photo shoots. Because, man, I never translated. Like, look at here. This is Mr. Olympia worthy. This is not photoshopped at all. He just has a crazy pump going. Maybe the mirror's a little bit distorted because gym mirrors do tend to make you look a little bit wider. It's very subtle, but I've noticed that. Looks a lot like Big Ramy here, actually, which is interesting considering he used to train him for a number of years there. But yeah, see on stage, he doesn't quite look as good as he did in the gym, right? Like, it just looks a little bit smoother and softer, a little more watery, which is ass backwards. You should look better on stage and more defined than you do in the gym, but it's the lighting too. Anyway, on the beach though, this is Mr. Olympia worthy for sure. This is an epic shot. We got this guy, Roland Surlock, I believe is how you pronounce it. And before this guy succumbed to palumboism, which is very unfortunate, but he did. An awesome most muscular. Look at the traps, mountainous. Look at the pecs, that crazy split there. The delts look really good too. This is tremendous stuff. Mike Matarazzo, known for his guns, but also some of the best calves ever too. You can see that there. They're freaky big and really good sweep in the tricep. I like these poses a lot for Mike. And speaking of bellies, though, we got Serge Nubret. Those guns are like at least 10 years ahead of their time. He was very aesthetic, rocking a beard there. Next to Sergio Oliva and Arnold. And I don't really like any of the way that these guys hit this pose. It just looks a little bit weird with their hands so far forward like that, especially Sergio. But nonetheless, let's take a look at the myth. Even though I don't really like the way he hits the pose, there's no denying the physique itself. And you can see it looks a little bit better here in this picture. Younger Sergio. Looks like he took a bath in baby oil. We got him next to the oak again. Arnold's head looks like it's going to explode. And once again, yeah, see, I don't really like the way these guys hit the pose most of the time. It looks just kind of weird. This is better, though, from Arnold. Arnold was probably the best overall to hit this pose of all the old school bodybuilders. You can see it right here. Look at the pecs. Yeah. He's got a solid ass crab pose. This is a legendary picture right here. Yeah, it's pretty obvious that he was probably the best of all the old school guys by the number of pictures I'm able to show you, because he's probably got twice as much as the next best guy from the 70s. But Mike Mentzer was pretty good too. Look at the bellies there and the arms. Those arms were way ahead of their day. Really dry and hard muscle, right? You can tell he did that Dorian style training, that high intensity training. Heavy ass weights. We got Danny Padilla. They called him the Giant Killer for good reason. Really short guy, but very well developed, very thickly built. Not as much as this guy though. Brutal Bertil Fox. Look at that vein running up his neck. Looks like his head's going to explode any minute. This guy was just really thickly built, especially through the chest and the arms. You can see that right here. It's not even really hitting the pose properly in most of these pictures, but he's just a beast. You can see it anyway. Next to Sergio Oliva. Gary Stridham. Some of the best delts in chest development ever, but especially for the 80s. See that right here. And again, looks really solid on this hands-on hip variation. This guy, Dennis Newman. Really never heard much about him. Don't know too much about the guy. He was one of the last guys I came across when I was making this video. But he's got a really good hands clasped most muscular pose, as we can tell by these 3 pictures right here. This guy, Frank Hillebrand. Frank Hillebrand. I don't even know. I know nothing about the guy. Just stumbled across this picture, got the name, threw him in here. This could be just a one-off. Phil Hernan, looking like the Incredible Hulk right here. And once again, yeah, huge but smooth. Yeah, not very well conditioned, but you can see the potential there, just the massiveness on the guy. Mike Francois. Very powerful guy from the 90s. Had a powerlifting background. You can see that in the density of his muscle. Lee Priest, a narrow guy, very arm dominant, but I was able to find a couple of really good pictures of him hitting the most muscular pose, like this one and this one here. Look at the bicep peak there, it's freaky. It's got a life of its own. We got Paul Dillette, and look at all the veins squiggling through his chest there. Freaky. This guy was a real freak. They called him Freakenstein. And you know what I realized about this guy? The reason his proportions look so otherworldly and ridiculous, his head is too small for his body. Just straight up. His head is too small. You can notice it here. And like now that I pointed it out, you'll probably be like, oh yeah. Like that's why his arms and his delts and everything just look so ridiculously proportioned. It's because his head is too small. Not taken away from the guy's physique because it was crazy. I mean, look at Lee Labrada there. Like they called him Freakenstein, and I can picture like bolts coming out of his neck. It'd be a perfect effect. Great Halloween costume for him. Anyway, we got Jean-Pierre Fuchs, another mass monster from the 90s. Yeah, when he came in condition, this guy was a scary sight. Like right here. This is Sparta. We got Nasser El Sambadi. Again, you're noticing a trend here, guys, with all these mass monsters. I told you this was their pose, and sure enough, they're shining. Yeah. Pretty freaky development here. Very granity in this shot. Nasser El Sambadi. Mustafa Mohammed, like the mini mass monster is what I call him because he's a shorter guy, but he reminds me a lot of Nasser, especially that midsection. Very blocky, but very thickly developed abs. I really like him in these 2 variations of the pose, the hands on hip and the hands behind the back. Look at the legs too and the thickness through the chest and the delts. Zach Kahn, haven't seen him yet, but yes, he makes an appearance here because this is by far his standout pose. He's got some of the best arm genetics and delts of all time. So he looks amazing in this crab, most muscular. Just an absolute behemoth. And the hands clasped. This is almost Levrone-esque with that crazy tricep sweep there. It's too bad this guy never was able to compete at the Olympia level and make a name for himself because he has the potential, or he had the potential. I think his legs and his back were what held him back. Anyway, we got Gunter Schlierkamp. He kind of reminds me a little bit of a hybrid of Arnold in terms of the height and the biceps, and Jay Cutler in terms of like the legs and the overall development and look to him, but not as good as either one of those guys, obviously, but pretty shredded here. So I included him in this list. Not as shredded as this guy, though. Andreas Munzer. Look at the feathering through the quads there. It's freaky. And all the striations and the delts. This guy was known as being probably the most ripped bodybuilder of all time. You can see all the striations in the chest and the delt there once again and all the way up the leg. Charles Claremont kind of reminds me of a younger version of Flex Wheeler or Kevin Levrone in terms of the, being smaller but very aesthetic and shapely. Look at the arm, too. Really good tricep development there. He just looks really pleasing to the eye, We got David Henry. And of all the guys in the 202/212 division, I think he's got the best, most muscular, hands down. Here he is just crushing Jose Raymond. This is very beastly right here. He's got honorable mention for one of the best hands class, most muscular, but the crab too. And when he comes in condition, which he usually does, he really brings like a solid combination of fullness and definition. Probably his biggest weakness would be that those legs being a little bit undersized, but that's not too bad, he's in a lower weight class. He has to make sacrifices. So we got the current 212 men's champ, Flex Lewis. You know what? He looks really good, but I think he should look better, honestly, considering he's got the best arms in his division for sure. And you could even argue some of the best in the world, right? After maybe Phil and Rolly and stuff. But he looks good in the pose, but nothing amazing, you know? Like, I feel like he should be doing more with what he has to work with here. We got this guy, Eddie Moisen. Don't know very much about him. I believe he was competing in the early to mid-2000s. Never really heard of him before I started doing some research for this video, but this is a really intense most muscular. Looks really good. The hands clasped. He's got massive arms, as you can see right here. Look at them. They look like tree branches going through his bicep and his forearms there. Don't really like the chest as much, though. Johnny Jackson, a.k.a. Mr. Traps, is what you could call him, because these make even Dexters look small. He's known for having probably the best traps ever, right? And the pecs too, the delts, just huge and dense. Obviously, that's that powerlifting background at work there. I really like him in this hands class variation too, probably even more than the crab. We got Cedric McMillan, who really combines aesthetics and the mass game very well. As you can tell, it's illustrated perfectly in this picture. And, you know, I just like him from head to toe. Very shapely, very well proportioned. Probably, well, arguably, not even arguably, one of the most aesthetic guys. You could argue the most aesthetic guy in the game today. You can see all the progress he made through the years in terms of the width and especially the legs. We got this guy, Justin Compton, one of the newer guys. As long as he comes in condition, he looks great. That's always the question with him. And Nathan DeAsha, the newest guy on the list. I believe he just made his debut this year at the 2016 Mr. Olympia. Really good X-frame and great thickness through the chest and delts. So he's got potential. And we come to the big three. In my books, these are the top three guys for the most muscular. I'm not going to give it a tie, though. I'm just kind of previewing this because these guys, to me, are in a class of their own. You could probably throw Ronnie in there, too, if you wanted to, but we've seen enough of Ronnie, so let's let some other guys shine. We got Levrone, Phil, and Rolly. First up, Rolly. No, he doesn't take the win. I'll explain why in a second, but let's just focus on the arms here, the delts. He looks amazing in this pose, right? Even the pecs. He's arguably got the best arms of all time. And I would certainly argue in the game today, they might even, like it's between him and Phil, but I think his are actually a little bit bigger than Phil's, so I would give him the edge. And yes, I did argue, this is from the 2016 Mr. Olympia, when he looks like a complete freak. This is amazing stuff. And I even argued that he was beating Phil. But that's this year. Overall, I feel like Phil's better throughout most of his career, and the thing with Rolly is that his legs don't quite measure up to that amazing upper body. So that's why I don't give him the outright win. Also because he's really good in the crab shot. Like, this is an epic crab most muscular. Same with this right here. And in this variation, which he's kind of made his own signature pose, it's like a hybrid between the crab and the hands clasped. But he's just not as versatile as some of the other, like as the top guy. So that's why I don't give him the win. But yes, he's in my top three for sure. Kevin Levrone. And he really owns this pose. This is the hands clasp. This is his pose. This is Kevin's pose all day, all night. He can also rock other variations too, but the hands clasp is really his pose. I tried to throw in some more different versions of the most muscular for variety, but really, I could have just put like 10 hands clasp most musculars because Kevin always hits this pose well. So he's not quite as good in the crab version, though, which is why I don't give Kevin the win either. Because, yes, he owns the hands clasp, but the crab, not so much. This variation of the crab, this isn't even really a true most muscular. This is just something that he does. This is his other signature move where he's like transitioning into the side chest and he does this thing with his arms where it's kind of like a crab, but not quite. But I threw that in there. Here he is just dominating Yates. Dorian didn't make the list, by the way, because even though he's one of the most dominant guys in terms of the mandatory poses overall, the most muscular pose is not his pose. He's just not very good in it, and he doesn't deserve to make the list, I don't think. But anyway, Kevin's dominating these guys. Here Kevin's even outsizing Ronnie, so that's unusual. Ronnie looks way smaller than normal. This must be like 2001, 2002 when he was at his smallest and weakest. But Levrone, you know, he doesn't really look that conditioned here. Maybe it's like an off-season or something, or it's like a smaller show. They didn't really care about dialing it in as much. But he's actually outsizing Ronnie, which is crazy. But this is my number one. Yep. And before you go ahead and click that dislike button, because I know Phil's got a lot of haters, the reason I'm giving it to Phil overall is there's two reasons mainly. It's because From head to toe, I feel like he's the most complete guy, right? You could argue in the history of the sport in general, he's the most complete guy. His only real weakness, I guess, would be midsection, and that's nitpicking. So that's his only real weak body part. The only other weakness he has is structurally he's narrow, right? We all know that. He's narrow through the chest. And that's why I can see a lot of people disliking this decision for me to give him the #1 overall slot because, yeah, he's a little bit narrow. But to me, it doesn't offset the fact that he just looks amazing in so many different variations of this pose. So if you want to talk about narrowness, though, Kevin's also narrow. So if you're going to say that I should have given it to Kevin because Phil's too narrow, like, come up with a different argument because, look, their chests are the same. Even Phil's arms and shoulders are bigger than Kevin's, right? Especially the biceps. Now, you could argue, yeah, I like Kevin more because he's more aesthetic in the pose. It flows better. I like the separation of his delt more. Okay, fair, but Phil's got bigger legs. He's bigger overall. So if you stood them side by side in a competition, Phil would win it like pretty much every time by today's judging standards because bigger is better, everything else being equal, right? So Phil's going to beat him. It's like 20 years apart. Of course he's going to beat him. But in the crowd, man, it's no contest. So that's why, for me, Phil's #1. It's because he can hit this pose in so many different ways and look amazing in every single variation. Whereas Kevin's more just like kind of a one-trick pony with that hands clasped thing. He's not quite as amazing. He looks great here. Don't get me wrong, but Phil looks better. And in terms of Rolly, I already mentioned, like, Phil has a better lower body than Rolly. And I feel like he's been more consistent throughout his career in this pose. So that's why I'm giving it #1 to Phil. I'm not a Phil fanboy. I actually like Kevin more as a bodybuilder. Overall, he's like more my favorite than Phil. So this is not biased because I love Phil. Besides, I just cut him up pretty bad in this year's Mr. Olympia review where I compared him to Rolly Winkler. And I said Rolly hits the pose better. But that was just this year. In terms of like their overall careers, I like Phil better. Here he is in 2011 when he started his Mr. Olympia reign against Jay Cutler. And even though Jay's got better width, Phil's going to crush him here because he's just so much better through the arms and, you know, more kind of roundness everywhere. So yeah, that's my #1 pick. Let me know in the comments if you guys agree. Let me know if I missed anybody. Thanks for watching. As always, I'm the Tominator signing off. I'll be back.